Have you ever been in a situation where people treated you like you were nothing, like you were invisible, like your presence didn't matter at all? Have you ever experienced that crushing feeling when someone deliberately tries to humiliate you in front of others, thinking they can get away with it because they believe you're powerless? Well, let me tell you something that will shake you to your core. What happened to me wasn't just another story of workplace bullying or social humiliation. No, this was something far more complex, far more satisfying, and far more devastating for those who chose to make me their target. My name doesn't matter right now, but what matters is what I'm about to share with you, because this story will make you question everything you think you know about power, revenge, and justice. I was living a double life, you see. Not the kind you're thinking of, not some secret agent or criminal mastermind situation. No, my double life was far more subtle, far more strategic, and honestly far more powerful than any of those Hollywood scenarios. On the surface, I was just another employee at Morrison & Associates, a mid-sized consulting firm in downtown Seattle. I wore the same boring business casual clothes as everyone else. I sat in the same uncomfortable office chair. I attended the same mind-numbing meetings, and I smiled politely when my colleagues made their little jokes at my expense. To them, I was David Chen, the quiet guy from the finance department who never spoke up in meetings, who always ate lunch alone at his desk, who never joined them for happy hour on Fridays. I was the perfect target for their entertainment, their punching bag, their ego boost whenever they needed to feel superior about themselves. But here's what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have imagined in their wildest dreams. The name on my desk, David Chen, that was real. But what wasn't on that desk, what wasn't in any employee directory, what wasn't common knowledge to anyone except a very select few people, was that I was also David Chen, the primary beneficiary and controlling stakeholder of the Chen Family Trust. And that trust, my friends, that trust owned the building we worked in. That trust owned the parking garage where they parked their precious luxury cars that they could barely afford. That trust owned the coffee shop on the ground floor where they spent $15 every morning on their overpriced lattes. That trust had controlling interests in the bank that held their mortgages, in the investment firm that managed their retirement accounts, in the real estate company that owned their apartment buildings. I wasn't just some random employee they could push around. I was, quite literally, the person who owned the ground they walked on, and they had absolutely no idea. Now, you might be wondering why someone like me, someone with that kind of wealth and power, would be working a regular job at a consulting firm. The answer is complicated, but I'll try to explain it to you because it's crucial to understanding this whole story. After my father passed away 3 years ago, I inherited everything. The trust, the properties, the investments, the businesses, everything. But my father, he was a wise man, wiser than I ever gave him credit for when he was alive. One of the last things he told me, one of the final pieces of advice he gave me before the cancer took him, was this: never forget where you came from, David. Never forget what it's like to be ordinary. Power without perspective is tyranny. Wealth without wisdom is waste. So I made a promise to him, right there in that hospital room, with the machines beeping and the fluorescent lights humming. I promised him that I would spend at least 5 years working a normal job, living a normal life, experiencing the world the way most people experience it, not as David Chen the heir, but as David Chen the employee. My father wanted me to understand struggle, to understand what it meant to work for someone else, to understand the dynamics of power from the bottom up, not just from the top down. So that's what I did. I took a job at Morrison & Associates under my real name, but without any mention of my family background, my trust fund, or my extensive ownership portfolio. I became, for all intents and purposes, just another worker bee in the corporate hive. For the first 2 years, it wasn't so bad. Sure, the work was sometimes tedious, and yes, I had colleagues who were competitive or standoffish, but nothing I couldn't handle. I actually enjoyed the anonymity, the simplicity of it all. I'd wake up, go to work, do my job, come home to my modest apartment in Capitol Hill, and live a life that felt remarkably normal considering I could have been living in a penthouse with a view of Puget Sound. I kept my promise to my father, and honestly, I was learning so much about human nature, about business from the ground level, about the real struggles that people faced with rent, with healthcare costs, with student loans. It was humbling in a way I never expected, and I found myself growing as a person, developing empathy and understanding that I know I wouldn't have gained if I'd just stepped into a corner office somewhere and started giving orders. But then, about 6 months ago, everything changed. That's when Victoria Sterling joined our department as the new senior director. Victoria was everything I wasn't, at least on the surface. She was loud where I was quiet, aggressive where I was measured, flashy where I was understated. She drove a bright red Tesla, wore designer clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and she made absolutely sure that everyone knew she had an MBA from Wharton and had worked at Goldman Sachs for 3 years before joining our firm. From day one, Victoria seemed to have it out for me. I'm still not entirely sure why. Maybe it was because I didn't fawn over her the way the others did. Maybe it was because I didn't seem impressed by her credentials or her designer handbags. Maybe it was simply because I was quiet and she interpreted that as weakness. Whatever the reason, she decided early on that I would be her favorite target. It started small. She'd make comments in meetings about my contributions being unhelpful or off-topic, even when they weren't. She'd assign me the worst projects, the ones nobody else wanted, the ones that required working late into the night or coming in on weekends. She'd schedule important meetings during my lunch break, and then criticize me for eating at my desk during team discussions. She'd forward my emails to other people with snide comments about my writing style or my suggestions. I took it all in stride, mostly because I kept reminding myself of my promise to my father. This was temporary. This was a learning experience. This was building character. But Victoria wasn't satisfied with just making my work life difficult. No, she wanted more. She wanted to humiliate me, to break me, to make me quit, or beg, or cry. And she enlisted others to join her. Marcus from sales, who was always looking to impress the higher-ups. Jennifer from marketing, who seemed to enjoy other people's suffering. And Brian, Victoria's assistant, who would do literally anything his boss told him to do. Together they formed this little coalition of cruelty, and I became their primary source of entertainment. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon, 3 months ago. We were having our quarterly all-hands meeting, and the entire company was gathered in the main conference room. About 80 people, including all the senior partners, the department heads, and the various team members from across the organization. It was one of those mandatory meetings where people pretended to pay attention, while actually checking their phones or planning their weekend. Victoria was presenting our department's quarterly results, standing up at the front of the room with her perfectly styled hair and her $1,000 suit, clicking through her PowerPoint slides with the confidence of someone who believed she owned the world. And then, she did something that still makes my blood pressure rise when I think about it. She put up a slide titled, Department Performance Analysis, and there, right in the middle of the screen for everyone to see, was a graph showing individual performance metrics for everyone in our department. But here's the thing. The graph was completely fabricated. She had manipulated the data to make it look like I was the worst performer in the entire department, like I was dragging everyone else down, like I was dead weight that the company was carrying out of pity or obligation. The room went silent as she pointed to my name at the bottom of that fake graph. I will never forget what she said next. Her voice was dripping with contempt, loud enough for everyone to hear. As you can see, some team members are clearly not pulling their weight. David here, she gestured toward me, sitting in the back row where I always sat. David has consistently underperformed across every metric we track. His project completion rate is the lowest in the department, his client satisfaction scores are abysmal, and frankly, his presence on the team has been more of a liability than an asset. She paused for effect, letting her words sink in, letting everyone turn and look at me, letting the humiliation wash over me like a wave. I actually met with HR this week, she continued, her lips curling into what I can only describe as a satisfied smirk, to discuss whether we should continue his employment here at Morrison & Associates. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not someone who angers easily. I've always been the type to think before I react, to consider consequences, to take the high road when possible. But sitting there in that moment, with 80 pairs of eyes on me, with whispers starting to ripple through the crowd, with Victoria's self-satisfied expression burning into my memory, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just anger, though there was plenty of that. It was a cold, crystalline clarity, a realization that my father's experiment, as valuable as it had been, was over, that I had learned everything I needed to learn from this experience, that these people, these cruel, petty, small-minded people, had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. I stood up slowly from my seat in the back row. The room got even quieter, if that was possible. Victoria's smirk faltered just slightly, probably because she expected me to either run out of the room in shame or sit there and take it like I'd taken everything else she'd thrown at me over the past 6 months. But I didn't do either of those things. I walked down the aisle between the rows of chairs, my footsteps echoing in the silent conference room, until I was standing right in front of her, right next to that projection screen with its lies and manipulated data. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw something in her eyes that I'd seen before in other people who had underestimated me throughout my life. That mixture of confidence and cruelty, that certainty that she was untouchable, that she was winning, that she had successfully put me in my place. And then I smiled. Not an angry smile, not a threatening smile, but a genuine smile. Because in that moment, I realized something beautiful. I realized that I was about to watch Victoria's entire world collapse, and she had absolutely no idea it was coming. "Thank you for that presentation, Victoria," I said, my voice calm and steady. It was very enlightening, very creative too. I especially appreciated the graphs. Must have taken you quite a while to fabricate all that data. Her face went red, and she started to sputter something about how dare I accuse her of fabrication, but I held up my hand. I wasn't done yet. "You know what's interesting?" I continued, still smiling that same calm smile. "I've learned a lot working here over the past few years. I've learned about business, about people, about power dynamics. But mostly I've learned about character, or more specifically, the lack of it. Some people in this room might be wondering why someone like me, someone you all seem to think is incompetent and useless, why I've stuck around despite all the, shall we say, creative management techniques that have been employed to encourage my departure." Victoria's smirk had completely vanished now, replaced by confusion and the first hints of concern. The rest of the room was absolutely transfixed. Nobody was checking their phones anymore. I had everyone's complete and undivided attention. "The reason I've stayed," I explained, "is because I made a promise to my father before he died. I promised him I would experience life as a regular employee, that I would understand what it means to work for someone else, to navigate corporate politics, to deal with difficult people. He wanted me to have perspective before I took over the family business. And I have to say, Victoria, you've been an absolutely excellent teacher. The best part about humiliating someone who deserves it isn't the act itself. It's watching the realization slowly dawn on their face that they've made a terrible, irreversible mistake. That moment when understanding begins to creep in, when the first seeds of doubt take root, when their confident facade starts to crack like thin ice under pressure. I could see it happening in real time as I stood there in front of everyone, watching Victoria's expression shift from confusion to concern to something approaching fear. But she still didn't understand the full scope of what was happening. Not yet. She was still operating under the assumption that I was just some disgruntled employee finally standing up for himself, probably thinking I was about to quit dramatically or make some empty threats about lawsuits or reporting her to HR. She had no idea that the ground beneath her feet was already crumbling, that everything she thought she knew about power and control was about to be turned completely upside down. I pulled out my phone from my pocket, and I could see Victoria's shoulders relax slightly. She probably thought I was just going to storm out after checking something on my phone, give her the satisfaction of seeing me defeated and retreating. Instead, I pulled up an email that had been sitting in my drafts folder for 3 months, ever since Victoria's campaign against me had really intensified. It was an email I'd written but never sent, an email I'd been holding on to like a loaded gun, waiting for the right moment to pull the trigger. And this right here in front of 80 witnesses, with Victoria's fabricated graphs still glowing on the screen behind us, this was definitely the right moment. "Let me make a quick phone call," I said, my voice still calm, still measured. "I promise this will only take a minute, and I think everyone here will find it quite interesting." I dialed a number I'd memorized months ago and put the phone on speaker. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Chen Family Trust Offices, Robert speaking." The voice belonged to Robert Martinez, the Trust's chief legal counsel, and someone I'd known since I was 15 years old. "Hi, Robert. It's David. I'm at Morrison & Associates right now in the quarterly all-hands meeting." There was a brief pause, and I could hear the smile in Robert's voice when he responded. Is it finally time?" "I believe it is," I confirmed. "Can you please verify for everyone here exactly who owns the building we're currently standing in?" "Of course," Robert replied, his voice taking on a more formal, professional tone. A property located at 1500 Fifth Avenue, Seattle, Washington, which houses Morrison and Associates along with several other commercial tenants, is owned by Fifth Avenue Holdings, LLC, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Chen Family Trust. The primary beneficiary and controlling stakeholder of that trust is David Chen. Is there anything else you need me to verify? I looked around the room, watching faces change as people started to do the math, started to connect the dots. Some people looked confused, others looked shocked, and a few, the ones who were quicker on the uptake, looked absolutely horrified. Yes, actually, I said, keeping my eyes on Victoria, who had gone completely pale. Can you also verify who owns the parking structure adjacent to this building? That would also be Fifth Avenue Holdings, LLC, owned by the Chen Family Trust, Robert confirmed. And while we're at it, I continued, my voice getting slightly harder now, slightly less friendly. Can you tell everyone who owns Cornerstone Real Estate Management, the company that manages most of the apartment buildings in this neighborhood? The Chen Family Trust acquired a 72% controlling stake in Cornerstone Real Estate Management in 2019, Robert answered. They manage approximately 43 residential properties in the greater Seattle area, including several high-rise apartment buildings in the Belltown and Capitol Hill neighborhoods. I watched Victoria's face as the implications started to sink in. Her apartment building was managed by Cornerstone. I knew this because I'd made it my business to know exactly where each of my tormentors lived, what they drove, where they banked, and what vulnerabilities they had. Not because I'm some kind of stalker, but because knowledge is power. And I'd been gathering that power silently for months, waiting for the moment when I'd need to deploy it. One more thing, Robert, I said, and now I wasn't smiling anymore. Can you verify the Chen Family Trust's relationship with Pacific Northwest Financial Services? The trust holds a 41% stake in Pacific Northwest Financial Services, making us the largest single shareholder. Robert confirmed. We have 3 seats on their board of directors. Thank you, Robert. That will be all for now. I'll be in touch later this afternoon. I ended the call and looked around the room slowly, deliberately, making eye contact with several people who had participated in or enabled Victoria's campaign against me. Pacific Northwest Financial Services was the parent company of the bank that held mortgages for at least half the people in this room. It was also the investment firm that managed Morrison and Associates' corporate retirement accounts. The silence in that conference room was absolutely deafening. It was the kind of silence that presses down on you, that makes it hard to breathe, that seems to stretch out forever even though it probably only lasted a few seconds. I could see people's minds racing, calculating, trying to figure out what this meant for them, whether they'd crossed me, whether they'd laughed at Victoria's jokes about me, whether they'd contributed to my humiliation in any way. Marcus from sales had gone white as a sheet, probably remembering all the times he'd made snide comments about my clothes or my quiet demeanor. Jennifer from marketing was staring down at her hands, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. And Brian, Victoria's faithful assistant, looked like he might actually be sick. But Victoria herself, she was still trying to maintain some semblance of control, still trying to salvage the situation, even though any rational person could see it was far beyond salvaging. Her voice, when she finally found it, was shaky but defiant. "This is," she started, then cleared her throat and tried again. "This is completely inappropriate. You can't just make threats like this in a professional setting. This is workplace harassment, and I'll be reporting this to." "To whom?" I interrupted, my voice cutting through her stammering like a knife. "To HR? Let me save you the trouble." I pulled up another contact on my phone, this time sending a quick text rather than making a call. Within 30 seconds, my phone buzzed with a response. I held it up so Victoria could see the screen. It was a message from Caroline Edwards, Morrison and Associates HR Director. The message read, "Received your documentation. Emergency board meeting scheduled for 4 p.m. today. We'll handle this appropriately." "You see, Victoria," I explained, sliding my phone back into my pocket, "I've been documenting everything. Every falsified performance review, every fabricated metric, every instance of workplace bullying and harassment. I have emails, I have voice recordings from meetings, I have testimonies from other employees who were too afraid to speak up. I've been building a case against you for months, just waiting for you to go too far. And congratulations, with this little stunt today, with your completely fabricated presentation designed to humiliate me in front of the entire company, you've finally crossed the line from unprofessional behavior into actionable misconduct." The shift in the room's atmosphere was palpable. People who had been aligned with Victoria were suddenly very interested in the pattern on the carpet or the emergency exit signs. The senior partners, who had been sitting in the front row looking increasingly uncomfortable, were exchanging glances that spoke volumes. They were doing their own calculations now, figuring out how much of their business, their leases, their financing, was connected to companies I controlled or had influence over. "Let me be very clear about something," I said, addressing the room at large now rather than just Victoria. "I don't believe in using power to punish people for minor slights or personality conflicts. If Victoria had simply been a demanding boss, or even just someone I didn't get along with, I would have finished my time here and moved on without anyone ever knowing who I really was. But what she did, what some of you enabled her to do, went far beyond professional differences. This was systematic harassment, public humiliation, and deliberate career sabotage based on fabricated information. That's not leadership. That's not management. That's abuse of power. Plain and simple." I turned back to Victoria, who was now gripping the edge of the presentation podium like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "And here's what's going to happen next. Within the next hour, the senior partners are going to receive a detailed report documenting every instance of misconduct I've experienced or witnessed during my time here. They're going to be faced with a choice. They can address this seriously, implement real changes, and salvage whatever business relationship they might want to maintain with the Chen family trust and its various holdings, or they can try to sweep it under the rug and pretend this didn't happen. But I should mention," I continued, my voice getting colder now, "that the Chen family trust is currently in the process of reviewing all of our commercial real estate holdings in Seattle. We're deciding which properties to keep, which to sell, and which to renovate and repurpose. The lease for Morrison and Associates in this building comes up for renewal in 6 months. I'm sure you can imagine how a decision like that might be influenced by how seriously the company takes workplace harassment and ethical business practices. The implications hung in the air like a guillotine blade. I wasn't making direct threats. I was simply stating facts, but everyone in that room understood exactly what I was saying. If Morrison and Associates didn't handle this situation appropriately, they could find themselves looking for a new office space, possibly at significantly higher rental rates, or worse, they might find themselves dealing with complications in their banking relationships, their investment accounts, their employee mortgages. Have you ever watched someone's entire sense of reality shatter in real time? It's not like in the movies where there's some dramatic moment of recognition and then it's over. No, it's slower than that, more painful to witness. It's watching someone cycle through denial, then anger, then bargaining, then fear, all in the span of a few minutes. Victoria went through all of those stages right there in front of everyone. First came the denial. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice rising in pitch. "You're making this up. You can't possibly. There's no way you could." Then came the anger. "You know what? Fine. So what if you have money? So what if your family owns some buildings? That doesn't give you the right to come in here and threaten people. That doesn't make you better than anyone else. You're still the same pathetic, quiet little man who couldn't stand up for himself." I let her rant, let her dig her hole deeper. Every word she said was being heard by 80 witnesses, including the senior partners who were looking increasingly horrified. When she finally ran out of steam, breathing hard and looking slightly unhinged, I responded in the same calm, measured tone I'd maintained throughout this entire confrontation. "You're absolutely right about one thing, Victoria. Having money doesn't make me better than anyone else. My father taught me that, and it's one of the most important lessons I've ever learned. But here's what you don't seem to understand. This isn't about money or power or who's better than whom. This is about consequences. You made a choice to treat another human being as less than, to systematically humiliate someone, to create a hostile work environment, and to fabricate information to damage someone's career. Those actions have consequences, not because I'm rich, but because what you did was wrong. If I had been just another employee with no resources and no recourse, if I had been someone who really was dependent on this job to pay their rent and feed their family, what you did could have destroyed their life. You were willing to do that. You were eager to do that. You enjoyed doing that, and the only reason it didn't work is because I happened to be in a position where I couldn't actually be harmed by your cruelty. But that doesn't make the cruelty any less real or any less wrong." The bargaining phase came next. Victoria's voice dropped, became almost pleading. "Look, David, maybe we can work this out. Maybe I was too hard on you sometimes. Maybe I could have handled things differently. We're professionals. We can move past this, right? We don't need to blow this up into something bigger than it needs to be. I shook my head slowly. This stopped being about just you and me. The moment you put that fabricated graph up on this screen in front of the entire company. You made it public, you made it official, and you involved everyone else. There's no walking it back now. And then finally, the fear. True, genuine fear as the full weight of what she'd done and who she'd done it to finally, truly sank in. Her face went from red to white to almost gray. Her hands were shaking. "David, please," she whispered. "I have bills. I have a career. I have a reputation. I know," I said quietly. "And I had those things too. The difference is I was willing to risk mine on principle. You were willing to destroy mine for entertainment. Let that sink in." I turned away from her then, addressing the senior partners directly. "Gentlemen," I said, nodding toward the three men sitting in the front row, who looked like they desperately wished they were anywhere else. "I'll be in touch with you this afternoon to discuss how we move forward. I hope we can resolve this in a way that's professional and fair to everyone involved. Well, to everyone who deserves fairness anyway." And with that, I walked out of that conference room, leaving behind 80 people in stunned silence, a humiliated bully, and the beginning of what would become a complete transformation of workplace culture at Morrison & Associates. As I walked through the hallway toward my desk to collect my personal belongings, because I knew I wouldn't be coming back as an employee, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not satisfaction exactly, not revenge, but something closer to peace. The peace of knowing that I'd honored my father's wishes, that I'd learned the lessons he wanted me to learn, and that when the moment came to stand up for myself and for what was right, I'd done it with clarity, with dignity, and with the kind of measured justice that my father would have approved of. I didn't go home that afternoon. Instead, I went to visit my father's grave at Lakeview Cemetery, something I did every few months when I needed to feel connected to him. I sat there on the grass next to his headstone, looking out at the view of Lake Washington in the distance, and I told him everything that had happened. I told him about Victoria, about the fabricated graphs, about finally revealing who I really was, about the look on everyone's faces when they realized they'd been tormenting someone who literally owned the ground they walked on. "Dad," I said to the stone marker that bore his name and the dates of his too short life, "I think I finally understand what you were trying to teach me. It wasn't just about understanding struggle or building character or gaining perspective, though those things were important. It was about learning that power without compassion is tyranny, but compassion without the willingness to use power when necessary is weakness. You wanted me to be strong enough to endure hardship, but also strong enough to stand up against cruelty when I saw it. I hope I made you proud today." The sun was setting over the lake, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and for the first time in months, I felt truly at peace with everything that had happened. The emergency board meeting that afternoon went exactly as I expected it would. Robert Martinez attended on my behalf, presenting the documentation I'd been compiling for months. The senior partners, faced with the overwhelming evidence of Victoria's misconduct and the very real possibility of losing their prime office location, their favorable financing terms, and potentially facing legal liability, made what they considered to be the only rational decision. Victoria Sterling was terminated immediately, for cause which meant no severance package, no positive references, and a permanent mark on her professional record. Marcus, Jennifer, and Brian all received formal warnings and were placed on performance improvement plans. Several policies were revised to include stronger protections against workplace harassment and clearer channels for reporting misconduct. And Morrison & Associates' lease was renewed for another 5 years, at very favorable terms, with the understanding that there would be regular audits of their workplace culture and compliance with the new harassment policies. But here's the thing that might surprise you. I didn't feel the vindictive satisfaction that Victoria probably expected me to feel. I didn't celebrate her downfall or gloat over her misfortune. Because here's what I learned from the entire experience. Here's the wisdom that my father's experiment ultimately taught me. Revenge isn't about destroying someone else. It's about refusing to let someone else destroy you. Justice isn't about making other people suffer. It's about preventing them from making others suffer. And power isn't about dominating other people. It's about having the freedom to live according to your principles without being vulnerable to those who don't share them. In the days and weeks that followed that fateful Friday afternoon, my life changed in ways both expected and unexpected. I moved out of my modest Capitol Hill apartment and into a place that better reflected my actual circumstances. A beautiful penthouse in downtown Seattle with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Sound. I started the process of taking a more active role in managing the Chen Family Trust's various holdings and investments, working closely with Robert and the rest of the team to identify opportunities for growth and positive impact. But I also did something that I think my father would have appreciated. I used the experience to inform how I wanted to use the family's wealth and influence going forward. I established a foundation dedicated to supporting victims of workplace harassment, providing legal resources, counseling services, and financial assistance to people who were being bullied or abused in their jobs, but couldn't afford to fight back or leave. I implemented policies across all the companies and properties the trust controlled, policies that prioritized employee well-being, that created safe channels for reporting misconduct, that rewarded ethical leadership, and penalized abuse of power. And I made a commitment to never forget what it felt like to be powerless, to be targeted, to be humiliated, so that I would always use whatever power I had in service of protecting others from experiencing the same thing. About a month after everything went down at Morrison & Associates, I ran into Marcus, Victoria's former ally from the sales department, at a coffee shop downtown. He saw me, and I could see him debating whether to pretend he hadn't noticed me or to come over and say something. Eventually, his conscience or his self-interest, I'm not sure which, won out, and he approached my table. "David," he said, his voice hesitant. "I just wanted to say, I know it doesn't change anything, but I wanted to apologize. For how I treated you, for how I went along with Victoria's behavior, for not standing up when I should have. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." I gestured for him to sit down, and we talked for almost an hour. He told me about how the atmosphere at Morrison & Associates had changed since Victoria left, how people were more careful about how they treated each other, how the senior partners had brought in consultants to help rebuild the culture. He told me that he'd been doing a lot of thinking about his own behavior, about how easy it was to justify cruelty when you were part of the group doing it, about how he wanted to be better. And I believed him, because here's another thing I learned from this whole experience. Most people aren't truly evil. They're just weak. They go along with things they know are wrong because it's easier than standing up, because they don't want to become the next target, because they tell themselves it's not really that bad or that someone else should do something about it. Understanding that doesn't excuse their behavior, but it does help explain it, and it opens up the possibility for genuine change and growth. I accepted Marcus's apology, not because what he did was okay, but because I could see that he genuinely wanted to do better, and I believe in giving people the chance to become the person they want to be. As for Victoria herself, I heard through various channels what happened to her after she left Morrison & Associates. She struggled to find another position in Seattle, unsurprisingly, given that news of her termination had spread through the professional community. She eventually moved to another city, started over in a different field, and from what I understand, kept a much lower profile. I don't know if she learned anything from the experience, if she ever reflected on her behavior and decided to change, or if she just became more careful about who she chose to bully. I hope it's the former, but I've made peace with the fact that I may never know. Several months after the confrontation, I gave a talk at a leadership conference about ethical management and the responsible use of power. I told a version of my story, changing some details for privacy, and the response was overwhelming. Dozens of people came up to me afterward to share their own stories of workplace harassment, to thank me for speaking up, to ask advice about how to handle similar situations in their own lives. That's when I realized that what happened to me, as painful and frustrating as it was, had value beyond my own experience. It became a teaching moment, a case study, a reminder that how we treat people matters, that abuse of power has consequences, and that sometimes the person you're stepping on is actually the person who controls whether you keep standing at all. I also learned something crucial about myself through this experience. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was, not because of the money or the power or the influence. Those things are just tools, just resources. I'm strong because I was willing to endure months of harassment and humiliation in service of a larger principle, in service of keeping a promise to my father, in service of learning lessons that would make me a better person and a better leader. I'm strong because when the moment came to stand up for myself, I did it with grace and dignity rather than with cruelty or revenge. I'm strong because I chose justice over vindictiveness, education over destruction, principle over pride. Now, I want to take a moment here to ask you something, and I really hope you'll engage with this in the comments below. Have you ever been in a situation where someone was abusing their power over you? Where you felt helpless or humiliated or trapped? How did you handle it? What did you learn from the experience? I think it's so important that we share these stories, that we talk openly about these dynamics, because silence is what allows bullies to thrive. When we speak up, when we share our experiences, we create solidarity, we build community, and we make it harder for people like Victoria to get away with their behavior. So please, take a moment and share your story in the comments. You never know who might need to hear it, who might be going through something similar right now and needs to know they're not alone. Looking back now, almost a year after that Friday afternoon confrontation, I can see how everything has changed. The way I view power, the way I understand leadership, the way I think about my responsibilities not just to myself, but to everyone who is affected by the decisions I make and the influence I wield. My father's experiment, his dying wish that I experience life as an ordinary employee, gave me something that no amount of money could have bought: perspective, empathy, and a bone-deep understanding of what it means when those with power choose to abuse it. I run the Chen Family Trust very differently than my father did, not because he was wrong, but because I had the benefit of learning lessons he wanted me to learn. I prioritize ethical business practices, transparent leadership, and the well-being of everyone who works for or with the companies we control. I've used the Trust's resources to fund programs that support workplace rights, that provide resources to people facing harassment or discrimination, that promote models of leadership based on service rather than domination. And I'd like to think that my father, wherever he is, would be proud of the person I've become and the choices I'm making. The most important lesson I learned from this entire experience is this: your circumstances don't define your character. Your choices do. Victoria had power, position, credentials, and resources, but she chose to use them to hurt people. I had even more power than she did, but I chose to use mine to stand up against cruelty and to create systems that protect people from the kind of abuse I experienced. Neither of these outcomes was predetermined by our circumstances. They were the results of choices we made about who we wanted to be and how we wanted to treat other people. And here's something else I want you to understand. Something that's absolutely crucial to making sense of this whole story. This wasn't about me being better than Victoria or proving that I was more powerful than her. This was about standing up for a principle, about refusing to accept that cruelty is just an inevitable part of professional life, about using whatever resources and privileges I had access to in order to create change that would benefit not just me, but everyone who came after me. Too often we think of power and justice as being about individual victories or personal revenge, but that's not what real change looks like. Real change happens when we use our moments of leverage, our windows of opportunity, to reform systems and create better standards for everyone. That's what I tried to do at Morrison & Associates, and that's what I continue to try to do through the foundation and the various initiatives the Chen Family Trust supports. I want to share one more thing with you before I wrap this up, because I think it's important and I don't want you to walk away from this story with the wrong message. Some people, when they hear this story, their first reaction is to say something like, "Well, that's great for you, but most people don't have the kind of power and resources you had. Most people can't just reveal that they own the building and make all their problems go away." And they're absolutely right. Most people don't have the specific advantages I had, and it would be dishonest and unfair of me to pretend that my situation is typical or that anyone could do exactly what I did. But here's the thing. You don't need to own a building to stand up for yourself. You don't need to have millions of dollars to document harassment, to file complaints, to build a case, to refuse to accept being treated as less than human. Power comes in many forms. It comes from solidarity with coworkers, from knowledge of labor laws and workplace rights, from the courage to speak up even when it's scary, from the willingness to walk away from situations that are destroying you even when it's financially difficult. The specifics of my story are unique to me, but the underlying principles: document everything, know your rights, build your case, choose your moment, stand up with dignity. Those principles apply to anyone facing workplace harassment or abuse of power. And if you're in a situation right now where you're being bullied or harassed or abused, please hear me when I say this. It's not your fault, you don't deserve it, and you don't have to accept it. There are resources available, there are people who can help, and there are ways to protect yourself even if it doesn't feel like it right now. Reach out to HR if you have an HR department you trust. Document everything in writing. Talk to a lawyer if you can afford one, or find legal aid services if you can't. Connect with coworkers who might be experiencing similar treatment, and never ever let anyone convince you that you're the problem when someone else is choosing to treat you with cruelty. As I sit here now in my office with its view of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains in the distance, thinking back on everything that happened and everything I've learned, I feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude for my father and his wisdom, even though I miss him every single day. Gratitude for the experience at Morrison & Associates, as painful as it was, because it taught me things about myself and about people that I couldn't have learned any other way. Gratitude for the opportunity to use the resources I've been given to make a positive difference in people's lives. And gratitude for the chance to share this story with you, to connect with you, to hopefully inspire you or encourage you, or make you think about power and justice and how we treat each other in our professional and personal lives. So let me ask you again, and I really hope you'll take a moment to engage with this. What's your experience with power dynamics in the workplace? Have you ever witnessed someone abusing their authority? Have you ever stood up to a bully? Or have you ever regretted not standing up when you had the chance? Share your thoughts, your stories, your insights in the comments below. Let's create a conversation about these issues, because the more we talk about them openly and honestly, the harder it becomes for people to abuse their power and get away with it. And if this story resonated with you, if it touched something in your experience or made you think about these issues in a new way, please show your support by hitting that like button. It really does make a difference in helping this story reach more people who might need to hear it. Subscribe to my Truth Revealed Tales for more stories like this one, real experiences, honest reflections, and insights into the complex dynamics of power, justice, and human nature. Make sure you click that notification bell too, so you never miss a new story. We post new content regularly, and I promise you every story has something valuable to teach us about ourselves and the world we live in. Remember, understanding how power works, how it can be abused, and how it can be used for good, that's not just academic knowledge. That's practical wisdom that can change your life and the lives of people around you. The more we educate ourselves, the more we speak up, the more we refuse to accept cruelty as normal, the better we make the world for everyone. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story, to really hear what I went through and what I learned from it. Thank you for being part of this community, for caring about these issues, for wanting to understand the complex dynamics of power and justice and human nature. And thank you for being willing to engage, to comment, to share your own experiences, because that's how we build understanding and create change. Until next time, remember this: you have more power than you think you do. Your voice matters more than you know, and the way you choose to treat other people, especially when you have power over them, that defines who you are far more than any title, any salary, or any position ever could. Choose kindness, choose integrity, choose to stand up for what's right even when it's difficult, and never ever let anyone make you feel less than you are. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you in the next story.